71% of the nurses who leave their job cite peer and manager relationships as the reason. Did you know that 71% of physicians and nurses have linked incivility to medical error? 27% of them said it led to a patient's death. All right, if you were about to make a mistake, would you want somebody to call you on it or not say anything because they were afraid of how you would react? What if that mistake was going to happen to your mom, your dad, your spouse, your partner, your child, or your precious grandbaby? I'm telling you, the way we treat each other in healthcare is just as important as the care that we provide. Hi, my name is Dr. Renee Thompson. I am the CEO and founder of the Healthy Workforce Institute. You know, I've been a nurse for about 30 years, and I've pretty much done everything that you can do as a nurse. I mean, from bedside nursing, I was an educator, I worked for a home care company, I worked for a managed care company, I was a frontline manager, and I had an executive role. And about 10 years ago, I realized that it didn't matter what organization I worked for or what role I had. I swear there was always another group of nurses who made it their mission to make my life difficult. And I didn't understand it. I mean, wouldn't you agree that working in healthcare, especially now, is hard enough without worrying about your coworkers making it harder? And in a moment, I said, that's it. Enough is enough. I mean, I just couldn't sit back and say, well, that's just the way it is in nursing. I had to do something about it because you see, when disruptive behaviors go unaddressed in healthcare, bad things happen to nurses, to us, and the very patients we have vowed to serve. So let's talk. Did you know that we see more disruptive behaviors in healthcare than in any other industry in the world? Seriously, we see more bad behavior in healthcare than in our government, law enforcement, our legal system. We see more badness in healthcare than in any other industry. And why do you think that is? Here are just a few reasons. Well, think about the amount of stress that we're under, in particular in healthcare, especially over the last 2 years. I mean, we have every single day we walk into work, we never know what we're going to get. It's that unpredictability of patient care. Your stable patient is a patient who codes on you, where the patient you were worried about all day long is fine. Think about what happened during this pandemic. Everybody else was running out of the building, running out of their workplace, and they got to stay home and work, while all of you had to run in to the building, not only caring for these patients, but putting yourself, your life, and your family's life at risk. We know that when people are burned out and stressed out, they lash out. Now, we understand this. However, I'm still going to tell you that there is no excuse for treating each other with cruelty. But we have to take a look at the fact that we see more stress as nurses working in healthcare, as practitioners working in healthcare, than really any other industry. So it makes sense. Well, why else do you think we see more disruptive behaviors in healthcare? Well, that's just the way it is here. We have normalized bad behavior for so long in healthcare that we don't even notice it anymore. We say things like, well, that's just the way it is. You know, nurses eat their young. Although, did you know that nurses eat their young, they're old, and everything in between? We're just a bunch of eaters. And we use excuses for people's behaviors. We say things like, that's just the way she is. She's a really good nurse. Don't let anything she says don't take it personally. Or, you know what, if you need anything, don't go to him. He doesn't like people very much. We justify people's bad behaviors because of how good they are. And as a result, over time, we just accept it as the norm. And I want you to think about this. When anyone on the healthcare team isn't comfortable speaking to anyone else on the healthcare team, it stops the flow of information. And when we stop the flow of information, that affects someone's mom, spouse, or child. And it's one of the other reasons why we see such bad behavior in healthcare. And then the third reason is, boy, do we have a hierarchy, don't we? And when most people think of this hierarchy, and what comes with that hierarchy is this perceived power that somebody believes that they have over someone else in a lower hierarchy. We think of the roles. We think of the physicians, and then the nurses, and then the support staff, or the executives, the C-suite, and then the senior leadership team, and then the frontline leaders, and so on. But it's not just the roles. It's tenure. It's how long they've been there too. And this is where you can see that lateral violence between nurses, and this is showing up with the older, more experienced nurses to the newer, younger nurses, or people who are in a support role, who have been there for decades, and how they treat, say, new nurses or new physical therapists. It's not just the role. It's also how long they've been there. And when these three things come together, as a result, we see disruption, we see an unhealthy work culture. And what we're finding is that we are hemorrhaging really great nurses and putting our patients at risk, because what we do is we ignore bad behavior. So I want you to think, about not sitting back and saying, that's just the way it is in nursing. And instead, let's do something about it. Nurses can be so caring and compassionate to their patients. It's time that we start sharing that same caring and compassion to each other. When I was a brand new nurse, I worked with a nurse, let's call her Karen. Karen was one of those nurses, when I would come into work, I'd look at the assignment board, not to see what patients I was caring for. It was to see who I was working with. And if I saw that I was working with Karen, I was like, oh, Lord, I'm working with Karen. Karen wouldn't give you the courtesy of spitting on you if you were on fire. Karen was one of those nurses that only cared about her patients, her shift, wouldn't help anybody else. She just came in and focused on her work. Well, one day, our unit secretary said to me, hey, Renee, Karen's at lunch and they just called for her patient to go to the cath lab. Would you be willing to take Karen's patient down for her? Because I work cardiac step down, and we had to transport patients on a stretcher with a monitor. They had to have a nurse with them. And I said to her, you want me to take Karen's patient down for her? And she looked at me and she said, mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, why should I take her patient down? She would never do the same for me. And then I thought, I'm in my mid-50s now. And when I think back on my life, I've made some mistakes. I've made some bad decisions. And even when I was in my early 20s being a new nurse, at that time, I had thought, I've made some decisions even up to that point. But you know what? I've never regretted doing the right thing. I've never regretted making a decision that I felt was the right thing to do. And then I thought about this. Who do I aspire to be as a nurse? And am I going to let anyone else affect who I aspire to be? And then I thought, what if this was my dad? Would I want a nurse taking my dad down to the cath lab, even though she knew her colleague wouldn't do the same for her? And of course, I took the patient down. And then Karen came back from lunch, and I'm sitting in the nurse's station, and she says to the unit secretary, "Where's my patient?" Okay. And the unit secretary said, "Oh, Renee took him down for you." And what am I expecting from Karen? "Oh, thank you, Renee." And what did I get? Nothing. And I got a little knot in my stomach. You know, it's just like when you let somebody else out in traffic and you think you're being nice. And as they cut through, what are you waiting for? You're waiting for the thank you. And if you don't get it, what do? "Oh, you're welcome." Guilty. But I thought, you know what? I don't care. I did the right thing. 3 months later, situation was reversed. I was at lunch, and the same wise unit secretary asked Karen to take my patient down for me. Do you think she did? She did. She did. Never underestimate the power that you have to influence other people for goodness. Because remember, the way we treat each other is truly just as important as the care that we provide.